Our second reading comes from the Gospel of John again. Everyone who eats my flesh and drinks my blood lives in me and I live in them. Just as the living Abba God sent me, and I have life because of Abba God, so those who feed on me will have life because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven. It's not the kind of bread your ancestors ate, for they died. Whoever eats this kind of bread will live forever. Jesus spoke these words while teaching in the synagogue in Capernaum. Many of his disciples remarked, "We can't put up with this kind of talk. How can anyone take it seriously?" Jesus was fully aware that the disciples were murmuring in protest at what he had said. "Is this a stumbling block for you?" he asked them. "What then if you were to see the chosen one ascend to where the chosen came from? It is the Spirit that gives life. The flesh in itself is useless. The words I have spoken to you are spirit and life. Yet among you there are some who don't believe." Jesus knew from the start, of course, those who would refuse to believe and the one who would betray him. He went on to say, "This is why I have told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted by Abba God." From this time on, many of the disciples broke away and wouldn't remain in the company of Jesus. Jesus then said to the 12, "Are you going to leave me too?" Simon Peter answered, "Rabbi, where would we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe. We are convinced that you are the Holy One of God." Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Let us pray. Loving God, we are grateful to be in this space at this time to gather around your word that gathers us each and every week. We ask that you will open all of our hearts, our minds, our hands, our spirits, our ears, that we might receive whatever it is that you have for us in this moment. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. No matter what state or what country we lived in, I remember always being the new kid growing up. I always had to figure out how to get in with the other kids. I wasn't even trying to be popular, but I was searching for like a basic sense of belonging. If I were to ask even around this room, I bet I'm not the only one who's ever sought a place to belong. So travel back with me to 3rd grade, Kalamazoo, Michigan. I was at a new school without my siblings for the first time. I met Mrs. Sokola, my new teacher, and she introduced me to another student who was designated to be my helper for the day. This girl didn't seem to like me very much, and that was confirmed at recess when she ditched me at the door. So as I looked out at the playground, I saw a section where most of the girls were playing with jump ropes. And I slowly ventured over, with each step mustering up the strength needed to ask to join in. This was a familiar walk, as I've had to do it often in my life, but it still wasn't easy. I got to the first game, and I heard the most dreaded phrase I've ever encountered in my childhood. Tick-tock, game locked. That's what I heard when people didn't want to play with me. That was the law of the playground, and once it was spoken, I couldn't argue. It just meant I needed to find some other place to play. Eventually I did all right. Some of the kids went against the laws of the playground and included me in whatever it was 3rd graders did back then. I found people willing to eat lunch with me, and I even had some people who would share their seats on the bus. Though it wasn't always easy for them or for me, it was through those few who received me and welcomed me that I was able to thrive and be the best 3rd grader I knew how to be. We don't often spend time with our wise ancestor, King Solomon, who's back in our readings this morning. We heard briefly last week about his prayer for wisdom as he was just beginning his leadership. In our reading today, he is completing the work of rebuilding the temple that David prayed for after its destruction. And so this is Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the new temple. It's noble even to hear him pray for the ability to use the wisdom that God gave him in a practical and relationship-based way. Toward the end of our reading, he essentially names the inclusion of foreigners as a way for them to live faithfully in covenant with God. That he was explicit in this petition can alert us to the exclusion and violence non-Israelites were experiencing. This petition is a word of hope for the outsiders and the insiders to be able to live peaceably and legally in the same space. This is not a foreign concept to us, and I'd say especially not to this congregation. Our current immigration situation would greatly benefit from heeding this wise prayer that Solomon shares in the height of making Israel great again at the completion of the temple. The reality of immigration in this country is not as clear-cut and problematic as our lawmakers would have us believe. There's so many people whose lives get interrupted and their families torn apart because of these ill-written laws to keep targeted folk out. People have had to find creative ways and distant places to keep their love and lives together. And even for those who actually have a pathway to legal immigration, there's still a pile of paperwork and several hoops to jump through just to get an interview. Tick-tock, borders locked. It's an outrage that people are still being prevented from fully participating in family life because of their non-heterosexuality. We've certainly made huge strides to be inclusive of all people, no matter what their sexuality may be, but we must remain vigilant as we face an administration set on dialing back basic level human rights and erasing large groups of people. Tick-tock, sexuality locked. Historically and currently, people of color haven't and do not have the same access to resources that have become a birthright of sorts for many of our white siblings. Black lives matter. We know that. I suspect most, if not all of us in this room, know that. But does our community know that? Does our state? Our country? Race relations have come a very long way here in America, but there is much yet to do to truly honor all people of every color. Tick-tock, race locked. We've long known that educating folk is one of the most powerful things we can do to empower a people. That's why it seems so very painfully obvious how targeted our educational systems are. Knowledge is power, so we disempower folk by not giving them access to proper education. We stay in the shadows about issues that directly affect our very communities, and we watch them crumble. Tick-tock, education locked. I could go on all day about the different ways we get tangled up creating laws and participating in keeping folk out of accessing what we perceive as scarce resources. You could pick any human category, and I bet we could quickly come up with several ways in which oppression exists even there. We deal with oppression and exclusion around matters of gender. Our children, youth, and elderly populations are targets for age discrimination. For centuries, physical and mental disabilities have been widely misunderstood, to put it very mildly. We live in a time and place where Christianity is no longer a religion of the few, and in some ways has become elitist and exclusionary. We then hide behind our bigotry, behind the cries for religious freedom, even as we actively persecute others who dare to have beliefs that differ from ours. It is human nature to want to belong and also to want to protect and look out for us and ours. Sometimes, though, we're so intent on protecting what we have that we end up keeping others out, often in deadly ways. History shows that happening over and over again, and we're still doing it now across the world. And sometimes our oppression doesn't come from the outside. We can certainly rattle off all the different systems in society that keep us back. We're much more at ease calling out everyone else out there who are actively participating in keeping us out. But we seem to not even notice the ways we oppress the other, and even those like us in our communities. Thinking back onto my experiences on the playground as a girl child, I realized it was the girls who kept me locked out of their games. And now that I'm no longer bitter about the situation, I can somewhat see why it went down like that. As a grown-up, I can now understand that we only had a limited amount of time for recess. There could only be 2 rope twirlers at a time, and 1, maybe 2 people jumping. These girls felt like they had to be selective about who got to play to protect their precious resource of time on the playground, so that they could have the best possible jump rope experience with the limited resources they had. I get it. Unfortunately, though, this frame of mind did not remain on the playground. We've grown up with it as we continue to compete for one thing or another with our limited access to resources. This hoarding mentality is a sickness of our society. And though it plays out differently in different settings and circumstances, none of us are exempt from this. We work hard at getting and keeping what we've got at any cost. We get so caught up surviving, we end up perpetuating the very systems we're trying to fight. In some cases, we don't even recognize we're doing it. There are times when we get so focused on doing things right that we forget to do the right thing. We get so afraid of losing all that we've spent years achieving that we begin to preserve the very structures we despise and fight against. Our sexual orientations, pigmentations, physical iterations, and gender identifications need to stop creating these separations among us, making it so that we cannot experience the radical relationships Solomon prays for God to help them and us cultivate and nurture. Tick tock. What have you got locked? It's a matter of life and death that we begin to come together, not just for ourselves or for those in our own circles, but for the good of the entire world. Today, I'm challenging us to rethink our ways of protecting the insiders and to be open to the other, whoever that may be. Societal outcasts, those who are found just outside of our comfort zones, and even in places we least expect. Now, I'm not here to offer solutions. I'm just making observations, and hopefully as we share observations with one another, we can together discover creative ways to live and learn with each other and the other. With Solomon, I pray that we might be able to enact our individual and collective wisdom in ways that will help us be more faithful to our covenant with God. I pray that we may be bold enough to go against these human systems that separate us and know that we're invited to come as we are, that we may realize that with God, there is a place for everyone, no matter what identities accompany our spirits. Tick tock. Nothing is locked. Amen.